Are you having a baby? Is your friend having a baby? Is your sister having a baby?
Oh, hopefully not. Is your mom having a baby?
Do you live in Utah?
Then you're going to want to make this amazing rag quilt for a boy or for a girl. Let's DIY that.
We're gonna.
For this DIY, you need 7 different pieces of flannel fabric cut at ½ yard each. Now that you've got all of your fabric, lay out one piece at a time and cut 2 strips of each fabric at 6 inches wide. Okay, when you open up your fabric, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have 2 long pieces of fabric. You also will need to cut 2 strips of each fabric at 3 inches wide. So you'll have 2 strips of fabric at 6 inches wide and 2 strips of fabric at 3 inches wide. Here you have all of your fabric cut into 3-inch wide strips and 6-inch wide strips. Now it's time to sew these strips together. When sewing these strips together, make sure that you have the wrong side facing in and the right sides facing out. And we simply just sewed down the center of each strip, each pair of strips, if that makes sense. So right here, you see that she's got 6-inch strips and she's sewing them together, right sides both facing out. In the end, you're going to have a pile of sewn strips, 6-inch and 3-inch wide. Now it's time to organize your quilt how you want it to look by simply laying out the strips and finding which fabrics look best next to each other. This is why we have 3-inch strips and 6-inch strips, so that we can create a pattern with our fabric. It comes together quite nicely with these 7 different fabrics that coordinate. Now it's time to sew these strips into a blanket. Here I'm just sewing the fabric together using the presser foot as my guide. As you finish sewing your strips on, just keep on adding more and more strips. I'm showing you one side of the quilt. This side of the quilt has the seam and also a little bit of extra fabric. This is where you're going to snip it to make it more of a rag quilt. Now the other side is going to be completely flat and smooth. Just make sure as you're sewing that one side is always flat and smooth and that the other side always has the seam and excess fabric hanging off. Okay, now Stephanie's going to show you the smooth side. Here's the smooth side, and then I'm showing you as I'm sewing the side with the seams and a little bit of extra fabric that will soon be snipped. Now that we've got the quilt completely sewn together, all the strips are sewn together, you can see that it's a little bit uneven on one side. So you need to trim that off just so that it's completely even on all sides. It's really simple. We just folded it in half and then made sure that it was very even on one side. and then trimmed off the excess on the other side with our rotary cutter. Now that your blanket's all evened up, it's time to grab some scissors and get to snipping. Here's a close-up of how to create that fringe. Don't get too close to the seam or your blanket will fall apart. Okay, only a few more steps left to this amazing blanket. Here I am just sewing around the perimeter of the quilt, once again just using the presser foot as a guide. Now Steph is taking her scissors and doing the fringe around the outside of the quilt, just like we did in the middle of the quilt, just creating that rag-like look, that fringe, if you will. This is just an alternative to binding a quilt. But don't you worry, if your heart desires to bind a quilt, we have a video just for you. You can find the link to this video in the description below. Thank you so much for coming and watching this video, and follow along with us. Like, subscribe, we hope you will. Thank you.